Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of The Drawing Board. My name is David Franklin. I'm your host and thank you so much for watching today. If you're a regular watcher of the show, I apologize. I had a mic go out. It's not working very well with my phone and I was avoiding making videos, but I decided it's more important for me to put out a video than to be afraid of the audio being bad for a week or two. So please bear with me. We're going to try out a new sort of format for the show this week, and we're going to be talking evolutionary psychology. Now, I want to get into this. I'm really passionate about that. We could talk about some parallel universes, like what might have happened if, let's say, Romney won the last election, or if the human race would have decided to weaponize hot air balloons instead of airplanes. And I'm going to wait for this airplane to go by. So that's just a new direction that I'm hoping to try some things out in the show. And we're gonna go ahead and start this week talking evolutionary psychology and talking about a very controversial subject: why the human race is collectively, at least somewhat, afraid of guns. So why are we afraid of guns? We're gonna talk evolutionary psychology. And evolutionary psychology seeks to explain things by examining our past as the human race. So let's say your ancestor or my ancestor feared guns and one of their friends didn't. They were both in a situation where someone held a gun on them and one person ran away and the other person just stood there and got shot. Well, the person who was afraid is more likely to have offspring who survived, and those offspring are more likely to be afraid of guns, and so on and so forth until we reach today where we're afraid of guns. But this would suggest that we'd be afraid of guns from moment one. And as far as I know, if you point a gun towards a 1-year-old, they aren't necessarily going to be afraid of the gun yet. Now, there's not a lot of studies, as far as I know, that say that this is going to happen, but I don't know if modern ethics would allow us to, but maybe that study will be done. But for now, I don't know of any studies like that happening. But there are other traits that would happen that would cause us to be afraid of guns. For instance, knives and spears have been around a lot longer, and those are both weapons, but we're not necessarily scared of those either at moment one, because things like a knife might be used to cut open a fish that will bring you your next meal, or perhaps it'll be used to cut a notch into a piece of wood that'll help you start a fire. So sometimes that knife is going to be used for non-violent purposes, and even if you're using a gun for protection or to put food on the table, it's still essentially trying to kill something. And again, I'm not trying to get political here, but it's never really used to start a fire or anything like that. So it does have a singular purpose. But then again, guns haven't been around long enough for us to really start fearing them from moment one. So why might we fear things like guns and knives, even if we don't intrinsically fear them from moment one? Well, what I'd like to suggest is that we have learned to fear what is an aggressive stance. So I'm right-handed, and my aggressive stance, see if I can extend my little monopod here. My aggressive stance is going to have my left foot forward. More than likely, I could learn to switch and kind of swing like a lefty would with my right foot forward. But I am right hand dominant, and so more than likely, I'm going to have left foot forward, left arm back, right foot, my power foot and back for kicking, and my right arm, which is chambered to kind of hit from a distance or to throw a spear, or I might be holding a knife or a gun or anything like that, and that would be considered an aggressive stance. So we might know how to read the aggressive stances of human beings and other animals. For instance, we might be scared of a bear standing up like this rather than on all fours. That might be seen as aggressive stance, and we're able to read that. So why do we feel a little bit discomfortable? Why do we feel a little bit uncomfortable? Why do we feel discomfort when we are presented with an image of a knife or a gun? Well, that might not be something that we experience from moment one. However, it might be something that we learn to have a sort of negative association with. So if I'm going to threaten someone, or see a movie or see a news video of someone with an aggressive stance holding a knife like this, in that similar kind of aggressive stance, and they have a knife, they have a gun, all of a sudden I'm going to start associating that fear of the violent stance with the object, which could be an example of how I could learn to transmit my fear of something that I fear from moment one, an aggressive stance, and I'm going to transmit that fear onto an object. Or it could just be guilt by association. I hear about all these guns and knives that have been used in killings on the news, or I see it in movies. And so there are two parts of psychology. Evolutionary psychology only really explains nature, the things that you experience from moment one. And there's another side of psychology, which is nurture, and that helps explain what happens to us from moment one, the things we experience and see in daily life. So I've never had a gun held on me, but I've met people who've had guns pointed at them, and their view of guns is totally different than what mine might be, or someone else who's never had a gun pointed at them before, because they haven't learned to associate that. That's where things like PTSD come from. You have an association with an object, a sound, a temperature, something like that, a sight, and you associate that fear and that horror with those other things. Well, I could learn to remember how I feared for my life at that moment and transmit that fear onto an object, which would explain the nurture of why guns and knives and bow and arrows and spears and things like that might be scary to us. Of course, guns are the dominant weapon of this day and age. We aren't as likely to be threatened with a bow and arrow, so we aren't quite as scared of them, even though from an evolutionary perspective, we have been presented with bow and arrows for much, much, much longer. The rudimentary cannons were developed in the 1400s, I believe. So that's the beginning of gunpowder technology. So that's only 600 years, including cannons. We're not even getting into like doglock and flintlock pistols yet. We're talking just cannons having the ability to shoot. And that's only 600 years to get used to something. Evolution is a very, very slow process for us to learn to fear these things, or natural selection. We might call it that as well. And so we may not fear those weapons as much as we should bow and arrows, which have been around for millennia. But the fact that we don't fear bow and arrows intrinsically, or we don't see them as aggressive as a firearm, tells me that we are less likely. Now, I haven't done a study on this, and I would really like to see someone do a study on this. I'm not sure if ethically we could do it, but it'd be really interesting to see someone point a gun at children, even if it's like a water pistol, and see how they reacted. Though that might be seen as cruel and unusual, and therefore we can conduct the experiment. But it'd be interesting to see nevertheless. So, the fact that we are less scared of a bow and arrow, which has been around for longer, and according to evolutionary psychology, we should be more afraid of bow and arrows than we are of guns, but we're not. That tells me that our fear of guns is more of a nurture, more of something we see in the news or in movies, or something that happened to us actually in real life that causes us to be scared of these objects. So, why are we scared of guns? Basically, we're scared of guns because we associate them through, I don't know, the aggressive stance, through news, through having a gun pointed at us in our memories, causing some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder. Things like that are causing us to be afraid of objects. Just like, let's say, my mother in high school, she accidentally set some food on fire in the microwave and caused smoke damage to my entire house. Now, evolutionarily, we're scared of fire. That's been proven. We're scared of fire from moment one because it's dangerous. Even though it's a tool, it's still dangerous, and we're scared of getting burnt. So the fear of fire is normal, but a fear of a microwave is not really all that natural, at least not from a nature standpoint. From a nurture standpoint, if you were to damage your house from a microwave, yeah, it's totally feasible why you'd be scared of it. So why are we scared of guns? Why are we scared of knives? If you are scared of knives, maybe it's a negative association with that violent stance. Maybe it's association with bad things that have happened to us, or bad things that we've seen, or bad things that we have heard. And if you haven't ever had a gun pointed at you, it's probably through the news, through stories people have told you, and things like that. And I'm not saying that that makes it any less valid, because those guns were still used to do those things. I'm just seeking to explain. I'm just seeking to figure out the truth. And that's what we do on the show. I'm not trying to bring up any sort of political points here. I'm just trying to do some evolutionary psychology. So, next couple of weeks, maybe we'll talk about what would have happened if we got these canine teeth. What would have happened if humans would have found an advantage in not eating as much vegetation? What if we would have found an advantage in eating mostly animals? What would have happened if it was the other way around and animals weren't our thing and we ate mostly vegetation? How would that have caused the human race to develop differently, and what would the world look like today instead? I don't know. We'll get to that next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is David Franklin. Let me know if you like this format of the evolutionary psychology, or if you want me to talk about some of the parallel universe options. I'm really happy about this format. I'm liking it because it's easy for me to come out and just talk about it. I don't have to do as much research because I've studied this pretty hardcore. I really enjoy it. I've done a lot of this research for the book that I'm writing, so let me know if you like it. If not, we'll go back to the traditional psychology, traditional physics, which I also like. I'm an engineer, but that requires a little bit more research on interesting topics, and it's harder for me to just sit down and talk about it. So anyways, we hit the 10-minute mark. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next week.